Look, we are live. Okay. Doing your own productions. Welcome again to Let's Get Writing. And I'm Kathryn Taylor, your host, and my guest, Dr. Don Hodder. This is part 2 of a program we did on his recent book and his earlier book. But when you're doing your own production and going live on Facebook, there's always glitches and little things that you have to keep track of. And I'm not used to having a guest in here with me because most of what I do these days is virtual. So that changes the whole thing. And I've got to get used to the signals and signs. But welcome, and thank you for joining us. What we talk about on this show is the process of writing, creating books, how these things happen, and we help you find inspiration and ideas, and we hope entertainment about how books come about. So if you haven't seen part 1, you can catch that on youtube.com, Kathryn Taylor TV. And if you're joining us with part 2, we'll be just as entertaining, won't we, Don?
We hope so.
We hope so. We'll keep you informed. So what we talked about a lot in our last interview was growing up in Newfoundland and the isolation, but how you came out of that and you shared these stories. So we're kind of at the point where you have finished your medical career now and you are an author.
Well, yes. First of all, I must say, as I said into the preface of the first book, just because you're very good at something doesn't mean you're going to be really good at the next thing you try. That's why a good doctor doesn't necessarily mean a good writer, any more than a good writer can be a good doctor. A story that I read was of this famous lady who had a large following, and she was having a book launch. So one of the people who was a real fan of hers was a neurosurgeon. And at the end of the program, he went up to her and he says, I really love your book. When I retire, I think I'll write a book or two. And she said, and I think when I retire, I'll do a little brain surgery. Sometimes we don't realize that writing a book can be very complicated and prolonged business, right?
Yeah, it can be. It can very much be that. And as you've said, and I've even said in one of my blogs, everybody at some point in their life, maybe not everybody, but many people say, oh, I think I'd like to write a book about that someday, or I'd like to write a book. But the actual process of doing it is much more involved than that thought.
Well, it takes, first of all, you're going to have your information in your head and some idea, why are you doing this? In my case, I got the idea many years ago that I should leave a legacy project for my kids who grew up in a different world. Mm-hmm. I'm 82 and my grandkids are young now and they don't know that world except what they read or hear, or we show them pictures and so on. Anyway, so I got this idea and I've been collecting stuff forever. Now, I am an old man who is not very smart technologically, but forever and ever, I have had a pen and a notebook.
All right, well, hang on here. Okay, this is how I do it. I go into my phone and I pull up notes, and I've got a note here. Don Hodder, notebook in his pocket. Ask him about that. Your way of doing it, my way of doing it. 2 ways of doing it, but they're both equally effective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. When I retired 5 years ago and started getting things together, I found a box of these books down in the basement of our house. I don't know how many, but there's probably 100 of them. And little tips, little ideas, little concepts, little stories. And the other thing I've learned is that sometimes at an odd time or an odd place, you're driving on the highway and a thought will come to you. And I remember passing this book over to my wife and saying, write down this sentence. And this sentence might be a story that happened many years ago. Mm-hmm. Or I've awakened in the middle of the night and something happens. I've just got to get up and do it then, because I know if I don't write it down now, I'll get up in the morning and I'll say, what was that you were thinking about at 4 o'clock in the morning? and it's gone into the ether.
And you think at the time that you think it, oh, I'll remember this in the morning.
Yes.
There's absolutely no way I will not remember this, but you don't.
Well, my brother had an expression, which I put in the preface to this one, which says, a short pencil is better than a long memory. Because you really can't trust your memory.
So there's a tip.
And studies have been done on that, which have shown that our confidence in a memory is probably way beyond what the memory is worth. Psychological studies have been done on that. I've read about them.
Really?
Yes. Well, think what happens on TV sometimes. You see an incident happening, and people are called to court, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 different people will tell 5 different versions of the same story, and some of them are contradictory.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing that happens is over time, we add things that have sort of come to our head, which may be true or not true, and then we forget things that really happened. So the story you're telling 5 years later or 5 months later may not be the same story you told initially.
Maybe much embellished. And we're known to be storytellers here in Newfoundland. And that seems to be something we do around the kitchen table or at social events. And traditionally, we've always done it. And we will listen to the same stories over and over again. Possibly they get better every year. There's a little detail here or there. But this is this tradition of oral storytelling.
Oral history it's
crazy.
Well, in fact, in Newfoundland, like when I grew up in the South Coast, there were very few people who could read and write. For example, my father's father, I have a copy of the wedding certificate. It happened in 1901. And my father's father was illiterate. He marked his X. The minister wrote his name down, and my grandfather marked an X. Now, my mother's father, he knew how to write his name. My mother was a Hillier. Think about this, how things change. My mother was a Hillier, Hillier.
Mm-hmm.
The minister wrote my grandfather's name as Thomas Hilliard. Hilliard.
Yeah.
My grandfather signed on the same paper, Hillyard. My grandfather's father, my great-grandfather, his headstone says Hillier, but his cousin in the next grave says Hilliar. So you got 4 spellings of the same name in the same family.
Mm-hmm.
So think how things get changed over time.
Yeah, and there were occasions that where people actually changed the name when they could for various reasons. They maybe didn't want that name anymore, and that did happen in the history of Newfoundland as well.
I would say, yes.
Yeah, it did. I've heard some stories from my husband's father out around Port aux Basques, and even their name has so many people changed the way Mousseau was spelled, yes, or said, or and mushroom, and it could anyone who's familiar with that. And I was asking why, and it was because they sometimes have reasons why they wanted to change it, and they could do it back then. Anyway, not so easy now. So we have been giving you a few tips here about writing things down, and when you take something, this is a memoir really of things that happened. So had you not had those notebooks, how much more difficult would this project have been?
Well, a lot of stuff would have been totally lost. And, sometimes you remember things in a different way that may not have happened, or you may change the place it happened. I know one of the stories I tell in this book was about when I was teaching in a little community on Nordane Bay, isolated community, and we had a Christmas program. And we had one of the big guys in school set up to play a part of Santa Claus. And of course, right at the critical moment, what do you get? Stage fright. So nobody was going to be Santa Claus. And here I was at that time, maybe 140 pounds, 5'9", 140 pounds, playing the part of Santa Claus. And so I put the suit on and go out, and the place roared with laughter. And the word spread, oh, Santa Claus has gone on diet. well, Santa Claus is dying. He won't be around next year because he got some flesh-eating disease or something, right? So it was a funny thing eventually, right?
Yeah.
But at the moment, it was. So these are little stories like that.
That come back to you. And so you had that guideline, but then how did you approach it? How did you take all this material and how did you bring it together?
Well, I sort of organized it according to, as you look at the table of contents, a lot of it is family, a lot of it is medical, and then I divided medical into serious stuff and funny stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of serious stuff and funny stuff. And some of it will bring you to tears. Some of it has a beautiful ending, right? One of the stories I have here is a mother brings in her 3-year-old daughter because when she was putting her to bed last night, she noted blood on her panties. And so she gave her a bath. Next morning, she gets up and the same thing has happened. So now she brings her to the doctor urgently. So now the doctor's got a problem. Dr. McMinn, is this a social problem or is this a medical problem? So I say, okay, it got to be a medical problem. So I phone the ultrasound people and I say, I want an ultrasound on this child's bladder and kidneys today, if I can get it. This is urgent. And they did. The next morning, I get a report. This 3-year-old has a kidney cancer, Wilms tumor, the most common one in children. So within another day, I have her into the Janeway, and she has her kidney out. Now that's a serious story, but there's a follow-up to that story. 2 years later, she's 5 years old now, so she and her great-grandmother are baking cookies. And she insists that her grandmother or mother come to the clinic and bring Dr. Hodder some raisin buns for his lunch. Real emotional connection here.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Hodder eats the cookies, and then he writes her a thank you note, which is in the book. It's a little bit of doggerel. It all rhymes and so on.
Yeah.
So she saved that, and many years later, she grew up and got an education, became a school teacher. I was at her wedding some years ago, and when we had our book launch, she allowed me to publish that book in the book. So I gave her a copy. She brought that little note to there to show me. She still had that 25 years later, but she had it laminated so that it wouldn't get crumpled up and so on, right? Isn't that a wonderful story?
It is a wonderful story. And there's so many, I mean, your role as a physician in communities, you came in contact with so many people. And there were just so many stories I'm sure that you could tell about those experiences, both heart-wrenching and heartwarming. Mm.
I have had a most wonderful life. It was very challenging. I grew up in a small community of fewer than 400 people. And as I said in part one, nobody had ever graduated from high school in what a little one-room school with 30 kids.
Mm-hmm.
My teacher in grade 11, I'd just done grade 11 the year before. She was 16 years old, and I was 14 when we started grade 11. And I gave her credit for getting me through.
Mm-hmm. Well, glad she did.
It's a long journey a circuitous journey from a little one-room school in an isolated community to Convocation Hall at Dalhousie Medical School. It took 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of it is in the books. So you had these stories. You took how long? I mean, from the time you conceived you wanted to do this legacy book till you held it in your hands. What was the time frame?
This one was at least 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I had all this stuff gathered together, now coordinating it, putting the stories together, and so on, and writing many versions. And I did have help. Some friends of mine, educated people, teachers, doctors, dentists, and so on, would read my articles and say, there's a mistake here, or maybe this paragraph should go behind this one. and so on, right? And so of course I gave them all a free book in the end. But and I must say, with regards to Friesen Press, I found them accidentally one time. I was online trying to find some answer to a grammar question I had.
Mhm.
How does this follow? And there was an advertisement for it. So I contacted them, and eventually we ended up doing business together.
Mhm.
But I found them very expensive. For example, I paid a proper, what you call a line editor, $800 to read my book. And he or she, I don't know who it was, he or she missed a lot of little things, punctuation stuff, grammar stuff, which the one thing that I found out that people read what they think should be there, and sometimes a little typing, like a letter left off, like making now becomes a not or something, right?
Mhm.
And that can make the difference between what you really mean and what you don't want to say.
What shall we say? Yeah. And I mean, when you make decisions, and actually I do myself work with I call them Friesen Press. They're experienced in many ways with self-publishing and make it very much of a hybrid process. But it is a financial commitment. In terms of going with a traditional publisher, they take that financial responsibility
Yes.
from the writer and oversee the product. And so, I mean, I'm sure the costs are still there, but it's a different model.
Totally different costs. This book cost me to print.
Mhm.
This was close to $10,000,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't sold a book yet. I haven't bought a book yet, and so on. Right. Whereas this one here cost me about $3,000.
Right. And you, again, is self-published, but done in a more local way. Friesen
Yes.
are a very professional
Yes.
company that offer
This
many
essentially is a better book.
services.
But what happens?
But this,
I learned there's got to be a writer.
mm-hmm.
There's got to be a printer, a publisher, who takes the book and organizes it, and you've got a book designer who designs the book in a certain way, gets you pictures or puts your pictures where they should be, and so on, formats it properly, and all this kind of stuff. And then you've got to have someone who's going to market that book for you
Mm-hmm.
and sell it, right? So, and then returns will come in. This second book, Follow Your
Leftover Stew.
Leftover Stew, basically a lot of the stuff was left over from this book, this first one, because the publisher said that book is too big. It's
Mhm.
almost 500 pages. So I added more stuff to it, and we made another book.
Yeah. And it was done locally. You worked with Kathryn here.
I did. I was introduced to her by a friend of mine who also published a book. And I contacted her, and she was my book designer.
Yeah.
So this cost me a whole lot less than the other one. It's not such a big book, and it's not in hardcover, and it's not online.
But it is an example of the many choices and the many different ways you can approach writing
Yes.
a book. If someone, I mean, we see, and I deal quite a bit with people who are with traditional publishers, and that part, they write the book and a lot of the rest of it's taken out of their hands. Marketing, no, because writers themselves have to be very active in marketing their books these days, and the more they can do that, the better the sales. But in this case, you took it all on. You had the experience of the first book, which undoubtedly helped.
It really did help, yes.
Yes.
And so this book was done by myself. It was organized as a book designer. Katya calls herself a book designer.
Mm-hmm.
She's very clever. I
I'm
would
very
recommend her,
familiar.
and anybody wants to contact her, if she will allow me, I will give you her name and number. But then I had to find a printer. So I went to various printers in St. John's and locally and said, "But how much is it going to cost me to print this book? It's maybe 150 pages." And so it varied. It varied greatly. From I can give you so many books for $3 or $8 or $10 or whatever. Right? And so basically with this book, I just bought the books. I bought in hundreds of copies. They're distributed around. And people email me and say, send me a book. I don't know if we said it yet on this program.
We haven't said it yet on this program. To get the book, available locally in central Newfoundland, different drugstores and so on. But also, you can email directly to Dr. Hodder, and we have set up a link for you to make that easy. And you can email him and request the book, $20 and $25 to ship anywhere in Canada. And if you're watching from somewhere else, he'll make it work. If you want the book, you'll get the book.
Well, so far, I've sent the books as far as St. John's on the east, and as far as Vancouver on the west, and as far as south as Alabama.
There you go.
So we've sent them a lot of them around the Atlantic provinces.
Excellent. And also, and I'm not sure if we have mentioned it because this is part 2, but the proceeds from both your books have gone to charity.
To charity. This book we netted $6,000, and that went to the music festival here in Grand Falls, Windsor, the Salvation Army Social Services, and the hospital foundation.
The foundation.
Sisson Central Health Foundation. This one here is all, that's whatever we make on this one, the leftover stew is going to go to the local food bank.
Right.
Central Newfoundland Food Bank. That's Grand Falls, Windsor, Beach Falls.
Yes, that covers, which is a very, very important cause to support, especially at this challenging time when people are often not receiving the incomes that they're used to. So thank you for doing that. Let's just go back a little bit to talk about your involvement with the community. Again, you've been so much involved with Kiwanis, because I remember every year you used to come in and see me. You never failed, and you wanted support, and which I was very happy to provide. But you've been very, very active in that manner in the community.
Yes, I've been in Kiwanis now for this year will be 45 years actually, and of course with COVID we've been less active than we were before. But with the music festival, I've been very active. Now I don't sing, and I don't dance, and I don't play music, but I'm an organizer, and that's very important, because if you can organize, you can raise funds. And I've been chairman of that committee back years ago, a couple of years, and have taken time off from my work to donate during the festival in March. Usually in March. And wonderful experiences, wonderful. Mm-hmm. One of the pictures I got in the book is when I'm president of Kiwanis Club. I'm donating in this book. I'm donating $2,000, I think it was, to one of our local students here who became won our music festival scholarship that year, and she's now probably retired because this is many years ago. Mm-hmm. But she became a well-known music teacher. Mm-hmm. So these are memories that. Memories for her, but memories for us as a picture
and memories that make a community. And I think as someone who maybe is not from here could still read these books, because I find the stories have a very universal message. They really do. They're heartwarming. They are a kind of a time capsule of what life was like in Newfoundland at the time when you were practicing as a physician, when you grew up. I mean, as I said in the first show, I was totally amazed that we were still so isolated here and had so few things that other places already had, and yet you were able to rise above all of that.
I've been truly blessed, actually. And as far as, like, I practiced medicine for 45 years, and when I came here, we were working in the hospital, and we did emergency department. We assisted the surgeons. Delivered babies, did surgery in the emergency department, what we used to call lumps and bumps, which some surgeons didn't want to do, but anyway, we did a lot of them, and so on. We could do them. We used to have one guy on the emergency department every day. So you want to send somebody down for cyst removal or whatever, you didn't have to go to the surgeon and wait for 2 years. It was done. And the other thing that happened, of course, we had very few super specialists, like we had one cardiologist here. He couldn't be on duty all the time, so we had to look after people with heart attacks. We had no neurologists, so we looked at people with strokes. We had one obstetrician gynecologist, We had to deliver the babies unless we sensed trouble, in which case we called them in. And in those days, we had no ultrasound, and half the twins that were born before ultrasound came, half the twins, even the best of hands, were undetected until the first one came out.
That was in the story in this book. I couldn't believe it. I was like,
Yes.
how? Did you have no idea that there were two babies in there?
One of the stories I tell here
No, I hadn't.
is about a 48-year-old lady having her babies at 48. Got caught on the change, as they say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was not her doctor, but I was on duty, so I delivered her baby, and everything was fine. She was a beautiful baby. He was crying lustily, and that's wonderful, right? Then I go to deliver the after birth, and the leg comes out. So there's somebody else in there, so we delivered that one too, and then she got beautiful twin.
Yeah.
Beautiful twin.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting story. And the other one related to babies arriving, where there was a mother and she did not want to leave because she had to finish the soap opera. And you talked,
Yes.
whatever, days of our lives. And she needed the last 15 minutes before she was going to go in the ambulance. So anyway.
Well, this happens, yes.
Yeah.
And so read about that. And I think that's
in this book.
That's
Yeah.
in the second book.
Yeah. And then you had in the reception, but in your waiting area, you had a TV, and there were early in the morning, someone didn't want to go in because they wanted to see something on. So you rearranged the schedule. These things would not happen today. I don't think they would. I think these stories are a wonderful memory and just a wonderful slice of life.
Some of the stories here, most of the stories here are a lot of them have to do with my grandkids,
Mhm.
like Teddy and Kelly. I don't know if you remember reading about. Do we have time to tell a story?
Well, we're getting a little tight on time. We're going to wrap up very shortly. If you want to make it very quick.
I can make it very quick.
Okay.
We one of our oldest granddaughter, Kelly. She lives in Ontario. She lives 30 minutes from the airport, Spearson Airport. So she's going to be 7 years old. So we go up for her birthday. So on the way to her home, I'm sitting in the back seat, and I'm saying, "Oh, Kelly, Poppy loves you so much. I wish you could stay a little girl forever." She says, "Poppy, aren't you aware of the cycle of life?" And I said, "Tell me about the cycle of life." And she said, "Well, I'm a little girl now, but someday I'm going to grow up, go to college like my mom and dad, find myself a nice husband, and we'll have our own family." I said, "You will?" "Yes," she said, "that's how it works." She's 7 years old. Huh? And so I said, "Well, in that case, then your mother would be a grandmother." "Oh, she'll be a grandmother and you'll be dead."
There's an uplifting
The
conversation.
Lion King. Watch The Lion King. It was an allegory, right? She watched The Lion King and she knew this is what happened.
Mhm.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is amazing. So many amazing stories. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for the time. We did 2 shows. We were planning for 1 and we did 2 because it was so much to cover. I'm not sure if we answered all the questions for people with self-publishing, but if not, you can always reach out to Dr. Hodder with your questions and we will try to make sure you get answers.
Hodder218@gmail.com.
Okay, and I would put that up if I had access to my computer, but I don't with these types of shows. I'm used to being more virtual. Well, thank you for joining us on Let's Get Writing. I'm Kathryn Taylor. This is Dr. Dawn Hodder. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and I hope we've inspired you perhaps to write a book, and if not, read a couple of great books and support Dr. Hodder and the charities. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye now. And here I go to hope my computer works to shut it up. It's still not cooperating. I don't know what it's up to today. A little bit of editing on this for sure. I don't know why it won't do it. Well, everyone, I'd like to be a comedian and do a running commentary right now, but I I can't. I'm going to give up on this.
Just pull the plug.
Well, I don't want to lose the show. Let's see. Here we go. Come on now. I had the same thing happen as last time. Come on. I have no idea why this is not working. No idea, folks out there, if you're watching. This is the entertaining part. Never had this happen before. Well, I'll just keep doing it. Eventually I got it. But we're still on. One must end the broadcast. There we go.